I just thought, how can we not have a degree of empathy towards these poor souls? You know, they're fleeing like war-torn countries or oppression or whatever it is. Imagine if that was the other way around. Imagine if here in London, suddenly we were bombed everywhere and we all had to go and we fled and it's unimaginable, I know, but it does happen to real people, fellow human beings. Imagine if we had to suddenly flee and no one wants you.
Gary Lineker is one of the most famous people in Britain, someone who has become something of a national treasure. A former international footballer, he was one of the greatest strikers England has ever known, as well as being one of the most liked. After his playing career, he immediately reinvented himself as a broadcaster, and since then has become one of the most prominent stars at the BBC. He is also no stranger to social media and has used social platforms to talk about everything from Brexit, he doesn't like it, the BBC, he likes it a lot, to mainstream media and the government's immigration policy. Because he is so high profile, his views on the future of the BBC, and in fact on media in general, are not just much sought after, they have the ability to steer public debate. The BBC itself is at an inflection point in its history. The corporation has a new Director General, Tim Davie, who will have to battle the government's desire for the organisation to explore alternative methods of funding, as well as fighting off a new number 10 appointed chairman. David, he has also suggested that BBC staff might want to stop using Twitter to tell the world about their own personal politics. Now, Gary, thank you for joining us today. I know that you're a free agent, but you seem to be, you gave the impression of being less impressed when Tim Davie suggested that BBC staff keep personal feelings to themselves. Should BBC employees be more cautious about espousing their own political beliefs on social media?
I think most of us are cautious. I know people don't necessarily think I am, but I very much am. I think the BBC have always respected that fact. I've never, for example, told anyone who to vote for or who I voted for in any election. The only political things I did were probably around the Brexit thing, which seemed like a different thing to which party it supported necessarily. And I went with Remain, and then I kind of championed it for a while after, and then eventually gave up over a year ago. Well, around the election, I thought, well, that's it. It's fine. And I've not spoken about it subsequently anyway. I'm interested in politics. I've always been interested in politics. And I will champion campaigns. People talk about the refugee situation. For me, that's not political, that's humanitarian. I try and be sensible with my tweets. I try and be courteous most of the time, which I think is important, especially in this day and age when people are so tribal. Of course, I've always thought that, and I don't think my position changes. I'm not in news and current affairs. The guidelines at the BBC have always been aimed at those, and it's stipulated that it's for those that work in news and current affairs. I work in sport, so it doesn't cover. If they change that, then obviously I'd probably have to just think a little bit harder on some tweets that I do. But I'm not really one of those that slams the government or anything. I do a bit of humour with politics, or I attempt a bit of humour. But I think I try and strike the right balance. Some people will disagree, of course, and some people will see bias, because I think anyone at the BBC knows that if the person has very strong left-wing views, they see the BBC as very right-wing. If a person has very strong right-wing views, they see the BBC as very left-wing. And I think while it strikes that balance, it's probably in something of the right place.
There was a report that came out this morning which illustrated exactly that people over the age of 50 think that the BBC does have a terrible left-wing bias, and anyone under the age of 20 thinks it's incredibly right-wing.
And that's why it's so difficult, because the BBC does have to try and keep a balance. I think by and large they do it remarkably well. It's not easy. And people, it's like, I compare it with the BBC Match of the Day running order. I mean, it's nowhere near as important, obviously, we'll state that. But what happens is every week I put the running order out on social media, and it's become a thing. Why is it always our team that's on last, etc.? So lots of people will complain about where their team is on the running order. No one ever complains about someone else's team, where someone else's team is on the running order. So I think once you get that, then you know you're in the wrong place. And the truth is, I don't think the BBC is particularly biased, because there are tens of thousands of people that work for the BBC. You've got all sorts of political views all over the place. But I think what happens is the bias is the person that generally complains about the bias. It's theirs, not necessarily the BBC's, or certainly not with the match of the day running order.
Possibly not. But others would say that espousing a particular opinion about Brexit is actually far more important than backing a particular political party.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I just felt I really wanted us to remain. I felt that we're much better being close to our biggest trading partner, and rather than splitting from it. I put that out there that I was a Remainer. Most people did at that point. Everybody, I think, was going one way or the other. Not everybody aired it publicly, obviously, but I felt strongly because I'm very patriotic, and I wanted the best for this country. And in my opinion, I felt that remaining would be the best for this country. Now, I stopped airing my views about Brexit and where it's leading us now. I don't harp on about every time there's a negative story about it, etc. As far as I'm concerned, it's your thing. Deal with it.
Sure.
Get on with it, and I hope it works out all right. I fear it won't be as good as people thought it might be, but I hope I'm wrong.
To have an opinion like that so loudly, particularly with your level of fame, can be quite dangerous. But did you suffer a lot of abuse or stalking because of being so high profile with an opinion like that?
Not necessarily stalking, but yeah, plenty of abuse from anything, whether it's about football or politics or Brexit or anything else. There are people that will not like you, and there's not actually that much you could ever do to change that. Sure. And that's their prerogative. But the one thing I've struggled to understand, struggled to grasp, is that if someone has a different opinion to you about something, that's fine, and we can argue it and we can disagree. But why the abuse? Why the hatred? Why the venom? And I think we've become so tribal. Whatever our views are, whether it's you're a Tory or you're in the Labour Party, or whether it's Brexit or this, or even now during this pandemic, it seems the two sides get stretched either way, and we become tribal, and I think it's worrying. I think social media does exacerbate that.
But you're very good at it, and you also use it to encourage debate. And you're, as you say, you're not particularly strident. But for a certain generation, particularly for my children's generation, it's become quite an oppressive force. How do you feel about the way that social media affects the young?
Well, it's a concern. I mean, they don't have to be on it, but a lot of them are. I think probably most of the young drift a little bit more, perhaps, to Instagram, which is a little bit kinder. You can still get plenty of abuse on there as well, but not to the levels of tribalism of Twitter and
Sure.
and the venomous comments that you can get from who knows who. I guess that's half the problem, is that there's a lot of hate comes your way, but where is it coming from? I noticed I did some tweet this morning about, well, it doesn't really matter what I'm tweeting about. I still get this. Underneath, you'll get something that's completely distanced from what you're actually talking about.
Sure.
Say, for example, this morning I did a little tweet about Ozil, who's come out and said he's really upset, blah blah blah, and I tweeted on the spot of that. And underneath it, I've got there's like abuse about refugees,
Sure.
and abuse about, and you think, well, hang on, I'm not even talking about that.
This is about him not being
and
included in
then
the
you
squad.
click onto their account and you see they've got lots of numbers after the name, and you think, bot.
Yeah.
And that as well is an interesting issue.
Is social media something that should be subject to legislation, do you think?
I don't know. I suppose because it is freedom of speech as well. I think it has to have some kind of guidelines, though, to where I suppose it has done as now, and I think they've certainly improved in those areas in terms of, hatred or racial abuse or something like that. I think, you can be taken off Twitter now, and that, which is a good thing, I think. But at the same time, it's that fine line, isn't it? What's freedom of speech and what's taking it too far? But I suppose it's like breaking the law.
Yeah. Being one of the most prominent people on the BBC, how do you feel personally about the possibility that the BBC could become a subscription service?
It's hard to know where it will go. I used to say that perhaps that was the answer, but I only used to say that because of the amount you get working for the BBC, because obviously you always get that we pay your salary. And I suppose in truth, the general public pay everyone's salary, but in that sense, it's a kind of a tax, and they have to pay it if you want a television. So I understand the issues, but I'd sooner focus on how good the BBC is and what great value for money it actually is. If it was a subscription channel and you paid the amount that we pay, which probably London prices, but it'd be about a cup of coffee a week. It is actually remarkably good value what you get for it. The radio stations, obviously the TV stations, the world, all sorts of different things. The online, great sport, great entertainment, brilliant drama, fantastic news, which we saw, I think, during the pandemic. And I think sometimes we don't champion our cause enough, and to say how good we are. I don't know what the future holds in terms of how they'll manage the licence fee, but it's hard to see how we can maintain the standards of the BBC and go down a subscription route without bringing in probably advertising and things. And I don't know. It's for people cleverer than me to decide what the future is.
But what is the USP of the BBC now? Because you've got Netflix spend more money on costume drama. Sky and BT take the bulk of the Premier League and European football.
But how much do you pay for all that? I mean, compared with what you pay for the BBC, that's
pay a fortune.
Astronomical sums by comparison. So yes, of course, if you want just to watch lots of dramas, and you get Netflix or Amazon or Apple, but if you subscribe to all of that, and then Sky Sports and BT Sport, I mean, that's a lot of money.
I know.
Whereas you will get, say Sport, for example. No, we don't have the Premier League every week. We have Match of the Day, which shows the highlights every week. We have the European Championships in the football when it comes around. We have the World Cup, and that's just talking about football. We have the FA Cup as well at the moment, and other sports are the same. We have bits of golf, and now we've actually started getting a bit of cricket again for the first time in a long time. The Olympic Games have always been on the BBC, so there is and brilliant dramas and stuff. So you get a mixture of everything for a kind of fraction of the price that you would have to pay if you bought all the others together. I mean, there's no easy answer to what the future is. It's a difficult one.
Who would you like to see as a new BBC chairman?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't really thought about that. And I don't know. Who's up for it at the moment. There was a couple that have kind of pulled out, and
Charles Moore pulled out.
I was quite relieved about that. He did seem extraordinarily anti-BBC.
George Osborne apparently is still in the frame.
Well, George Osborne would be interesting. I mean, he's gone into obviously newspapers, into the media world from the government.
Is it something
I'd
you'd
like
ever
someone
consider?
I'd like someone that would be massively supportive of the BBC.
Well, that's
and
you.
defend it.
Would
and fight
you do
for
it?
No, I wouldn't do it. No.
Why not?
No, because I'm busy doing Match of the Day. Cool, I wouldn't want that job.
You've been a very vocal and fierce critic of the government's immigration policies, which you won a lot of plaudits for, particularly when you opened up your house. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, it's not that I've lambasted the government's policy, although I think I think in recent times it's been quite worrying, some of the sound bites that we hear sometimes from the Home Office, etc. But I've always been a supporter, well, not always, but certainly over the last few years, of the refugee crisis. It's a humanitarian issue that the whole world has to deal with. I just think we should you know, obviously we can't have everybody in here. We know that. I know that. But we need to have our fair share, and the world needs to have their fair share. So I first supported that a few years ago, and I got criticised from the national newspapers and saying I should lose one of them said I should even lose my job at one point because of it. And I didn't quite understand that, because I don't think it was a political issue. As I said before, I thought it was a humanitarian issue. I just thought, how can we not have a degree of empathy towards these poor souls? You know, they're fleeing like war-torn countries or oppression or whatever it is. Do you think they want to leave their homes? Of course they don't. They're forced out. They have to travel the world. They get on, take for example the dinghies in the English Channel. Do you think that's what they want to do? They're desperate. And then when they arrive somewhere, they're filled with not with affection or love or anything, or understanding or empathy or sympathy, but with a degree of hatred and not being wanted. Imagine if that was the other way around. Imagine if here in London, suddenly we were bombed everywhere and we all had to go and we fled and it's unimaginable, I know, but it does happen to real people, fellow human beings. Imagine if we had to suddenly flee and no one wants you. How awful would that be? So that's how it started. And then getting round to taking in a refugee myself was, obviously I always get a lot of support and a lot of love for my thoughts on the refugee issue, but also from the other side, a degree of hate, shall we say. Yeah. And they always used to, the strange argument I used to think was, well, why don't you have them in your house then? And I used to think, well, is that your problem? You think they're going to live in your house?
Yeah.
Which is clearly not the case. So in the end, having had that constantly thrown at me for years, I actually started to think, actually, why wouldn't I? My kids are all grown up now. They're all in their 20s. And then there was a little thing with, I can't remember who, I was getting a bit of stick on Twitter recently, and it was the same thing. And then underneath, I don't actually look at the notifications, only of the people that I follow or blue tick, like post up. But underneath the tweets, sometimes you do see a couple of tweets below. And I saw this one that said, Gary, you might be interested in this. So I thought, well, so I clicked on it, and it was a charity called Refugees at Home. So I thought, oh, what's that? So I clicked on it, and then it offered you different things. You can have someone on a permanent basis, short-term basis, or almost like an emergency foster parent. Right. Which I thought, that sounds quite interesting. So I clicked on that, and then went through the process, and I had my first refugee the last few weeks. He left at the weekend. Right. Delightful chap. Brilliant for my children. Brilliant. Even they were saying, what a perception.
And where was he from?
He was from a place called Baluchistan, which is actually part of Pakistan, but they don't want it to be. He's come here to study law. He wants to free his country. He wants to get them independent from both Pakistan and Iran. It'll be difficult because they've got minerals, gold and natural gas. But it's been fascinating and a real education for my boys as well, because obviously they're privileged. They know they're privileged, but then to hear this guy's story, and he was brilliant with them. I think it's been really. It was a really, really positive experience, and I'll definitely do it again.
You will, yeah?
Yeah.
How fascinating! Brilliant.
He's come here to study law.
Yeah.
It was quite a story. I can't give too many details because of the circumstances with his family at home and stuff like that. He's vulnerable.
How do you think Keir Starmer's doing?
I think he's doing well. I mean, again, I think he's in a difficult position given the pandemic we're in, because you want to be probably, from his point of view, you're probably thinking, well, it's my job to challenge the government, but at the same time, we all need to be in this together, so we need to support it. I think it's a much stronger opposition than we had previously. I think it's an electable opposition. Yeah. And I think that's important for the country, to have that viable opposition. And for that, I think both sides will be better for it.
Sure. You say he's electable. Could you vote for it?
I never say who I'm going to vote
I know, I just thought.
but I could vote for him, whereas I couldn't have voted for the previous incumbent.
Okay. Now, we're
And
getting on.
I'll add at this point that I am actually your archetypal floating voter. Genuinely so. I've voted for all sorts of parties pretty much all of them at some point.
Right.
And I am that guy that flicks between one and the other.
Even the Greens?
I have voted Green once, yeah.
There we are. Now, these are the difficult questions. We're going to start talking about football now.
Oh dear.
What did you think about the proposed breakaway by the top 6 clubs, which was probably a move towards an eventual European Super League?
The big picture.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't a breakaway with the top 6. I think it was...
It would have been, though, eventually. Don't you think?
I think they were trying to get more power to make the decisions in the long term.
Sure.
I think in that sense, there's an absolute degree of truth. But also there were positives as well, weren't they? Because giving 25% of the Premier League's TV revenue down to the lower leagues would have made a massive difference.
So were you in favour of it?
I never thought it was actually going to be a thing anyway.
Right.
And it's the same now. We hear this talk. Here we go again. Manchester United and Liverpool are breaking away to be a part of a Super European League. We've heard that story every year for about 30 years.
Sure.
And it's way off happening. I can't see it happening.
Yeah.
And I think it's mostly nonsense. So I think, the coming together of clubs to try and help the lower leagues was a good thing. And I think sometimes the fact that they've got this 14 clubs to vote to change any decision doesn't always mean that we get decisions that are good for the long-term future of the game. So I understand why clubs do it and big clubs do it, but I just couldn't ever see it happening. I've actually always been an advocate of an 18-club Premier League rather than 20.
Sure.
So there were aspects of it I quite liked, but there are other aspects that worried me, like the divvying up of the broadcasting revenue between the clubs at the moment is, I think, something like, say, the teams near the bottom will get something like 100 million, the teams at the top will get 20 million more, whatever it is. Whereas under the new big picture, the way I saw it, that changed quite dramatically to get the big teams near the top getting way more and the ones near the bottom getting way less. The great strength of the Premier League is that any team can defeat one of the best teams on any given day. And if you change that, we'll end up with a league like, not that there's anything wrong with their leagues, but like Spain, where it's generally Real Madrid or Barcelona.
Sure.
I mean, they've done brilliantly in recent years with other teams, or Germany with Bayern Munich and Dortmund, or Italy with Juventus. So we don't want that.
Now, Jose Mourinho, Gareth Bale, back at Spurs. Can they win the Premiership this year?
I don't think they can win it, but we could have a strange winner this year. We could have another Leicester. It's not impossible this year, especially, I think, given the big injury to Van Dijk at the weekend and the strange circumstances of football at the moment. We're seeing wacky results all over the place, unpredictable scores, mad scores, thoroughly entertaining. Not the same, obviously, without having crowds in. But I think it could be a little bit of a random
Do you think
season.
someone like Everton or Villa could win?
I don't think Villa can win. But I never thought Leicester could win. I mean, you said at the start of the season, I would say no. But 5 games in now, you start to think, But then again, the 2 Manchester clubs, for example, started the season way after everyone else in terms of pre-season friendlies and stuff.
Yeah.
And they're improving now. I think Manchester City, Liverpool will be there. I just think it'll be a bit tighter. Sure. I don't think there's going to be a runaway this year like there was last year.
Marcus Rashford has obviously had an amazing year, but what does it say about our current government that it takes a 22-year-old footballer to change government policy?
Well, at least they did do U-turn and did see sense. I think what I'd like to say is that how proud I am as a fellow kind of old footballer, if you like, of a young man like that who's come into the game. He's a wonderful footballer. But what he's done off the pitch and his drive and to make things happen, and he's even after his MBE, he's gone in again, and as we've seen at the moment, he's a remarkable young man, and And I think it's been great that we've seen young footballers stand up for different issues, whether it's that or, say, Raheem Sterling or Troy Deeney with, racism, and Wes Morgan. But for young Marcus Rashford to do what he does at 22 years old and continue to play pretty good football at the same time is, I think, something very special.
What about two other young footballers, Mason Greenwood and Phil Foden? What would you have done if you'd have been England manager?
I'd probably have done what Gareth did. He probably reprimanded them privately, a lot stronger than he did publicly, which they're young kids. I mean, sometimes we forget with footballers, they're very young men. I mean, I've got 4 boys in their 20s, and they're all older than comfortably older than Phil Foden and Mason Greenwood, and they behave like idiots most of the time, and they have a lot of fun in their lives. And you've got to remember, these kids, they're teenagers, and they're... And I know what boys make mistakes. They mess up. But the important thing is they learn from it. And I think Gareth handled it well. He left them out of the next squad.
Sure.
They know there's a punishment. They will learn from it. They're both wonderful talents, and they're going to be great players for England. But we do have a thing in this country that we not necessarily build them up, but we do have this kind of... everyone jumps on people when they make mistakes.
Sure.
And they were bad mistakes, but mistakes that teenagers make.
Very true. What about that question? I mean, I haven't heard you talk about this for quite some time, but England manager, there must have been a point in your career when you thought you could have pursued that.
God, no.
No?
No.
Why? Come on.
I never saw myself as a coach. I didn't like training that much, let alone standing there watching others train. It was something that never ever appealed to be a manager or a coach. I knew what I wanted to do. I used to have the nickname Junior Des when I played in the World Cup squads with Gazza and Chris Waddle used to call me. And I was driven towards going into the media, and I wanted to present as well, because I just thought, I used to look at other sports. I said, it's like David Gower did cricket, and Sue Barker tennis, for 2 examples. And you just think, why is that not like that in football? We had Jimmy Hill, who occasionally presented, but he was by and large a pundit.
Sure.
Bob Wilson did it for a bit, but he was goalkeeper, so that doesn't count. And I just thought, if I could crack it as a player that's played at the very top, I thought it would give me like a bit of a niche, a little bit of an edge,
right,
and give me perhaps some sort of longevity in the business. And it's
look what happened.
Proved okay so far.
What about ownership? Ownership in a kind of meaningful way.
Ownership of?
Football club.
Well, I did for a little while. We kind of rescued, with my agent John Holmes, and fellow Leicester fan, when they went bust around 2000, 2001. And we just got together lots of friends, and some of them are lots of Leicester supporters, and some others not actually, that just all got together and kind of salvaged the club. And John was chairman for a few months, and I was involved at that stage, but I think that's pretty thankless as well, owning a football club. You need to be a wealthy country nowadays, or a huge American billionaire or something.
What about this thing about having to pay £15 to watch extra games at the moment?
Yeah, I think that was a bad move. I don't think that. I mean, it's a bit tone deaf, that one. And under the circumstances, what we're going through at the moment, given the fact that how much the clubs have spent despite the pandemic and stuff, I think to eke out an extra 15 quid. I understand in a way why the Premier League wanted to do it, because these were the games that weren't automatically going to be seen on television, the ones that were left. Prior to that, we'd actually had them at the BBC on free to air. And it also, I mean, people are giving Sky and BT stick for it, but I don't. It wasn't really their decision. Sure. It's been kind of thrust on them, and it costs quite a lot to put on a broadcast, an outside broadcast for a football match. But I think PR-wise it was a bad move and unfair, really.
We're all desperate to get back and watch football. When do you think it's going to happen?
I don't know. I think we're sliding into a second wave. It's hard to envisage it happening anytime soon. I mean, we've seen crowds in different things, like I think there was an Arsene Wenger thing he did in the Palladium recently, where there seemed to be a crowded audience, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of drive to get fans back in the ground at the moment, especially, so I can't really see it happening I don't know. I mean, we've seen it abroad in Germany, then they've had fans back. In France, they've had a few fans in. You would think, wouldn't you, in like a 40, 50,000 stadium, you could get at least 5,000 in pretty comfortably. I don't know what the fears are. It's an outdoor arena, but I'd love to see them try and get some back. Your guess is as good as mine when, but, you know, these viruses tend to like the cold and the winter, so spring, I don't know.
Sure.
Spring probably
Sure.
at best for certainly any kind of real crowd.
Okay, finally, and I know we've discussed this before, but if you gun to your head, who's going to win the Premiership this year?
Gun to my head, I'd go Manchester City.
Fantastic. Gary, it's been a delight talking to you
Pleasure.
today. Thank you so much for appearing at GQ Heroes. We hope to see you again in less challenging circumstances, but ladies and gentlemen, Gary Lineker, thank you.
Thank you.
Ooh.
We'll do that.